I don't think being honest about your failures means downplaying yourself, because you can be honest about both. And like, I think, like a few people tell me that, oh, you seem quite self-aware. And I think I'm self-aware about the ways in which I'm not very good at things, but out of like a sort of unhealthy, probably, prioritization of humility out of fear of being arrogant, I'm not very clear with myself and honest with other people about the ways in which I'm pretty good at this, that, or the other. So I think something that I'm trying to work on, and the thought that comes with what you said is, well, I think you can be honest about the things that you've failed at and what you've learned from it, and that's wonderful. But that doesn't need to come at the exclusion of actually being really clear about, well, and here's the ways. Like, I've also learned some ways that actually work really well.
Hey, this is part 2 of our discussion. To have the full context, be sure to watch part 1 here, and don't forget to subscribe.
Yeah, I think going back to the momentum, not perfection thing, I don't think I've ever heard a single individual ever say that you should prioritize learning more or perfecting that strategy or idea before you actually move into the thing. And so I really like that sentiment. And so I've also heard people describe being like an executive or the CEO of a company. The people that are getting paid a lot of money to do a position like that are getting paid because they're able to take on the chaos once it seeps into the company, without getting super stressed out about it, or at least battling that stress and still making good decisions on the fly. Because it's not necessarily like you're going to get paid for how good of a plan or how perfect of a plan that you can develop. While that is part of it, I think the people that are going to be successful in the end are the people that are actually going to be able to combat that chaos once it actually seeps into the company, once it inevitably seeps in, I should say. And so I think it then becomes, how can you build yourself into the kind of person that is able to fend off these problems as they come your way? How can you kind of slow down time, not get stressed out, make decisions on the fly, and ensure that you're going to be able to steer this company, especially at the CEO level, into a way where it's succeeding in the end? And that's kind of what it's making me think of. Um, Also, I had a conversation recently, and it was like, do I get my PhD? Do I get my master's? Because I want to learn more about this specific field before I actually get myself into it. And I don't necessarily think that's the train of thought we should have, because I don't think that's going to be the biggest factor in determining whether or not you're going to accomplish your plan at the end of the day. I think the biggest factor is going to be like what I was talking about earlier, with how you're going to be able to fend off these problems as they tend to develop. And so that's kind of my thought process when I hear momentum, not perfection. Um, I don't know if you agree or disagree with any of that, but yeah, that's kind of my thought process, at least.
So I think it's true that organizations inevitably face disruption, like some sort of chaos from the outside.
Yeah.
What I don't think is true, the good news is, I don't think it's true that it's inevitable that organizations must experience chaos on the inside.
Okay.
So I think the job, the hallmark of a great leader is actually to create a system of work and a working environment where that system is resilient. It plans for, it's designed for, and it's resilient to that. To your point, it's inevitable that you're going to have like disruptive factors coming from the outside, or even sometimes from the inside, like in terms of individuals and things like that. So the job of a leader is to design a system of work that plans for that inevitability, and plans that the organization doesn't just fall to bits when that happens. So I think it is true, based on my experience and everything I've read, like about being the leader and a manager, like of I was only involved in a sort of 400 person business, so that's still pretty big, but it's not tens of thousands of people, it's not millions of people like Amazon or Walmart or something like that. Yeah, of course it can be stressful, but I actually think there again, and this is something we're interested in, building out. So I touched on the programs of work, but also it's a chance for me just to clarify something. You know, managers and leaders and CEOs and presidents of countries are still human beings, right? They're still fallible people who have insecurities and they're just trying to work it out. Now, they might not be as open about it, might not be considered the dumb thing to be as open about it, but they're still human beings, right? Provided they're not psychopaths or something like that. They have insecurities. They're trying to work it out. They still have things that they care about and people they want to impress, and all the same, right? I think though, so there's a couple of things. Like one, a really important thing is about managing yourself, like outside of work. And this is not something I did when I was younger, but it's something I've been working on, particularly in recent years. Is so we need to bring our full selves to work, and we want to, with Impact Society, recognise that managers are full, complete human beings, and not necessarily distinguish like just their professional skills, but also recognise that part of being a good leader is about being in good shape physically, mentally, spiritually, in all those dimensions, not just professionally with your management sort of hard skills and your relational skills with people. And so we want to, in time, build that out and address that as well around the health and wellbeing side, and certainly speak or nourish in a way people's cultural and psychological needs to the extent that it complements their ability as a leader. So that's the first thing, is about managing yourself. But then within the organisation, it's about having a clear direction, good alignment, good systems of work. And one of the really important things is about, I think, as a manager, and it's something I got much better at with time, is being decisive when it comes to prioritisation. Because any organisation that's got any ambition has more things to do than it has time to do. And you read a lot, and it's my experience too, that actually like a thing that distinguishes completely stressed out leaders, and I'm not talking about when there's big disruptions, when there's a crisis, I'm just talking about in sort of steady state organizational operation. The thing that distinguishes people who are overworked and stressed out and getting burnt out, there's many things, but one thing is the ability to prioritize, the ability to say no to a bunch of stuff. It's inevitable that you're not going to get everything done. So you may as well be deliberate about it and let the small, not so important things not get done or go wrong. And the mistake that organisations and managers make over and over again is trying to get everything done. And, like one thing I often think about is, I use the example of Amazon before. Amazon, I think, probably has 1 or 2 million people, whatever. It's a lot of people. There's still just one CEO. The organisation I worked for before, there's 400 people, there's one CEO. Okay. So if your answer to keeping up with the stress and the disruption and the scaling of a business is just to do more and more work, is to pour in more and more hours, well, you can't scale that in this example to a 1 million person business. So you got to find, it's cliche, but it's true. Like, you got to find ways to work smarter, not harder. And certainly that's part of the problem we're trying to solve, is to provide people, well, here's a bunch of tools that will just help you work smarter. And there's research, I can't remember from where, it's from a US university. I read a book a couple of years ago that shows that over about 50 hours a week of work, once you get to, it's like 51 was on their statistical analysis, 51 hours of work a week, marginal productivity starts going down. Once you get to about 60 hours a week, total productivity starts going down. So what they're saying is someone who works 62 hours a week, say, on average, makes actually less of a difference than the same person working 51 hours a week, because they start going backwards, or something like that. And so I meet people, I have met people all the time. I was this person, like when I was younger, who are working, and it's glorified, unfortunately, and I think less and less so, but it's been glorified in the past to work 70, 80 hours a week. And it's not just, I don't think it's the right thing to do because it's unhealthy, but it's not a very smart thing to do, it turns out.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I think one thing that kind of stuck out to me was talking about having so many different ideas and not enough time to do all those ideas. And it kind of reminds me of the Naval Ravikant quote, if you've heard of who he is. But he says that desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. And so because of that, you need to be extremely cautious about what you desire. And so when you're kind of looking at this list, you need to have a really good understanding of what specific things I want, like pick a handful of these things, and then spend your 40 hours a week, the most productive hours, like you were saying, to those handful of actual ideas. So,
And
Yeah, so I think if that, sorry, BJ,
no,
but I
go
think,
ahead. Yeah.
if I think that's true at the individual level that you're saying, and that's in terms of your whole life, you know, what are all the things that you want to make a difference in your life. And there's another great quote that you can have anything, but you can't have everything, right? And I think
yes.
that's true of the individual level in our whole lives. It's true of the individual manager. You can't get everything done, and it's true of an organization. So with the concept of desire, if you think about setting your strategic plan for a team or for the organization as a whole, that's the articulation of your organizational desire. It's saying, well, what do we truly desire most as an organization? And let's be clear, there's a whole bunch of stuff that actually feel really important and meaningful, and we would really like to do it. But because we care so much and we're disciplined and we're committed to nailing those most important things, we're actually going to say no to those, all these other things for the time being. And if we have spare time, nobody does, but if we have spare time, we might chip away at them. But if any of them, like I think like a discipline of a really good leader is actually holding their team to account that if you set priorities with your individual team members, and you ask them, you do a review on a given week or at the end, particularly at the end of a quarter, and they haven't nailed their target, and you ask them to, you explore with them. Okay, well, let's talk about the reasons why you didn't. If one of the reasons they give is that they're working on something that wasn't an agreed priority, that's inexcusable. It's common, it's inexcusable. And that's where managers have to hold their team members account, and those managers have to be held accountable by their manager above them. Say, hey, we're serious about being productive. We're serious about our strategic plan. Because so often, teams, people, organizations are going to do a strategic plan. They go, oh, good, we got that out of the way. Now let's get back to what we're doing before.
Yeah, and so along with the Naval quote and what you were talking about, I was thinking that if this, okay, so desire is the contract to be unhappy until you get it. Well, so much about like social media and like just in general us communicating with each other, it's creating desires that will never be fulfilled. Like if you look on social media, you're going to see all these people in all these amazing places doing all these amazing things, and you're going to feel bad about yourself because you don't have any of those. When in reality, no one really has any of those. They just managed to get a nice photo, right? And
Sure.
even to the point with me, it's like I watch Rocky and I'm like, ooh, I could be a pro boxer. I could do all this. I watch a movie about astronauts. Oh, I could be a pro astronaut. Oh, I could be a pro musician. I could make it happen. And I'm like, wait, no, I'm good. I don't need all that stuff. And so, like one thought I had, I heard someone say that like the worst thing they could do psychologically is look at their peers' LinkedIn profiles, right? That because everyone's presenting their best selves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the point of a resume. That's the point of the LinkedIn profiles is to get hired. That's like the big thing. But if you look at it and you're like, oh wow, these people have had massive internships and all these projects and they speak another language. I didn't know they could do that and all this stuff. And so, one thought I had is create a resume, but and list all the places work and all the things you've done, but then list all your failures and do I messed this up. This went horribly wrong. I tried this. It worked for a moment, and then it fell apart. And I'm very curious that if you got like to the interview phase, like assuming you got an interview, and you could explain, okay, yeah, I failed here, but I learned all this stuff. Like that'd be, I don't know. I hope that if I ever have the opportunity to hire someone and they tried that, I hope that I would say yes to them just because that's, I mean, because everyone, that document exists whether you write it or not. There is a list of failures somewhere in your head or with the people you work with. Well, but so long as you're learning from those, like, and that's, I mean, that's all you can ask, right?
I think it's great. I love it. Like, so I hope that you'd hire those people too, because what that tells me, like, so I think exploring that recruitment as the example, like you want to recruit people to your team, but you want to recruit people to your life as friends, as a partner, as the people that you spend your time with, who are aligned in values. And so what I read into what you're saying is that you actually value honesty in people. Like, to your point, those things exist whether you write them or not. Those failures exist whether you share them with people or not. And so what I hear from that is that you value honesty and you value vulnerability. And I mean, it's hard to argue. Like, I'd love to hear someone argue that vulnerability and honesty aren't generally reliable ways of being a good human being.
Well, so the one argument in my head that stands against all this is that
Yeah.
at some point, honesty and humility and sort of like downplaying your accomplishments just becomes self-sabotage, right? Like at some point, doing all this marketing and if you did all your marketing, but you did all the failures and put out all the bad stuff, which is the meaningful stuff. Like the bad stuff is what you're going to learn far more from that than any success you have. And so if you put out all that bad stuff, and then people will start like, who was it who like stepped on the Hollywood lot and just started working and got hired? Like he didn't work there, but he just started doing stuff, and now he's like a famous movie director, producer, and did all this amazing stuff. Like it's that sort of thing with just having that confidence and not expressing those weaknesses because they don't know. They don't know you have all these flaws and weaknesses. And so if you can just fake it like that, then there's some success. But I don't know. Like this has been an argument in my head for several weeks now, and I'm glad I'm getting the chance to talk about it. But yeah.
Well, I don't know either, is the short answer. But like some thoughts come to mind. Is the first one is you said about downplaying yourself. I don't think being honest about your failures means downplaying yourself, because you can be honest about both. And like I think, like a few people tell me that, oh, you seem quite self-aware. And I think I'm self-aware about the ways in which I'm not very good at things, but out of like a sort of unhealthy, probably prioritization of humility out of fear of being arrogant, I'm not very clear with myself and honest with other people about the ways in which, I'm pretty good at this, that, or the other. So I think something that I'm trying to work on, and the thought that comes with what you said is, well, I think you can be honest about the things that you've failed at and what you've learned from it, and that's wonderful. But that doesn't need to come at the exclusion of actually being really clear about, well, and here's the ways. Like I've also learned some ways that actually work really well. Because if you want to be a boxer or an astronaut or work as an actor or an entrepreneur or an accountant or in data science, and so that's the first thought that comes. And the second thought that comes is, well, in terms of finding your people, like the place where you're going to belong in an organization, if people don't respond to your sincerity, then they're not your people. That's thought comes from. Now, with all of that though, there's a reality that, well, sometimes we need to find work, and sometimes, 99% of us always need to find work, and sometimes we can't be as choosy as we'd like to be about the organisations we go into. So I think it's fair and reasonable, and it doesn't make us indecent human beings to actually be smart about the way we put it forward. And so I think it's about trying to, I don't have the perfect answer, but about trying to find that balance and feel your way into the organisation where you don't use the interview doesn't become some sort of therapy session which I can easily imagine myself doing that, if I'm honest, like where you just start downloading like, oh, here's all the ways in which I'm unhappy with myself or something like that. So, you're right. Like I think there's a way to be connecting and honest and show some vulnerability without freaking people out when you first met them.
Yeah, and I think in that you sort of make this great point that it's equally dishonest to downplay your strengths as it is to pretend you don't have weaknesses.
Sure. Yeah. And in the context of an interview or trying to find a role, it would be dumb like to downplay it. So it's not, for many of us, it's not easy to do that, but I think for all of us, it makes sense to be balanced and honest about the things that we're good at. And I think for many people, this is true of me, like we tend to fall into some black and white thinking that, well, if I'm not excessively humble, then I must be disgustingly arrogant. And of course, it's not true, right? Like, of course, it's about finding the balance in the middle. And so using the interview as an example. But look, I think you sort of pointed to an example of someone going on a movie like I don't think like this fake it till you make it thing. It's a really hard one, right? Because I don't think that insincerity is just either in the long term a smart strategy if you want to be a human being that fits in workplaces or just in society. And I tend to think it's not right either. Like in terms of that, we'll all have different views on that. But it's a fine line between believing in yourself and often we just need a little nudge to actually, because I think many of us tend to underestimate and underplay, because many societies, not all societies, sort of look down upon anything that could be perceived as arrogance. And so, hence, to my earlier point, I think that leads sometimes to an overreaction where people go, "Oh, well, I need to actually stay silent on the things that I'm actually good at." Yeah, it's hard. I don't have any clear answers on it, but I'm really enjoying the conversation around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back to kind of what BJ was talking about with like hiring people and talking about people's failures. Like the resume, it's like a snapshot of everything that you've done well. It's like the Instagram profile, if you will, the snapshots of all your successes, and you don't get to see about anything that happened in between, all the work, all the failures that kind of led up to those things. And I think when people are interviewing, or they could do their best to, through those behavioral questions, kind of fill in those gaps, fill in the gaps between all these perfect snapshots that you're showing the person that you're recruiting, that the person that's recruiting you. And so you're also, though, too, with hiring, I think that people should look to hire individuals that have this sort of like a certain frame of thought. Like if you throw a problem at me, I'm going to follow like this course in order to solve this problem, instead of looking to hire people that have a certain skill set, because the skill set is going to change over the course of time as new softwares, as new market trends come up, because your skill set's going to need to change over the course of time. And so I don't necessarily think that the skill set's as important as your ability to sort of change along with the skill sets that's needed, right?
Yeah,
And so
I think that's true too.
being able to admit that involves a lot of integrity and humility, and those are the kind of things that leaders need to embody, right? So
I'm reminded of going back to direction, which I keep going back to it in my mind, in our work, in my writing, in my thinking, in this conversation, because it's so important, it's so fundamental. So if we should stay rigid and committed and have a one-eyed focus on whatever goal we choose, right? So it's not for me to say what you should each choose as goals individually or for any other organisation, but whatever goal you choose, I'd say rigidly focused on that, but stay completely flexible for how you're going to achieve that or what you need to do in order to achieve that over time. Because to your point, Gavin, that will evolve, like, because there'll be things that, we'll have all these beliefs about, like we do for Impact. So we've got a whole bunch of beliefs, and some of which I've shared with you about, I think this is how we're going to succeed. But in terms of staying, they're essentially hypotheses about, well, this is how we think the world works or will work, but we'll learn. And so I think that's true with a career as well. Like if you choose your goal, whatever it might be, maybe it's to make this certain impact in the world, or maybe it's, for many people, it's to achieve a certain level of X or Y. How you go about that, you'll need to stay flexible and open-minded as to how we go about that over time, because one, we might be wrong. You said earlier about you thinking about doing a PhD, so whatever your goal or goals might be, you might decide, just to use that as an example, well, doing a PhD is the best step I can make, one of the best steps I can make at the moment to getting that way. And you might get a year in, you might get 7 years in, hopefully not, and then discover that actually this wasn't the step in the right direction. So, it's glorified in all the sort of startup literature, like the idea of pivoting. But I think it's true, like whether you're an organization or individual, you got to be open-minded and prepared to pivot. And I'm trying not to drop the A word, which is agile, which I hate that word because it's so overused. But if he's going to say flexible, then I'll say the F word, flexible, instead.
I haven't heard that word used much. I hear pivot used a lot.
Yeah, it is. And I'm mildly embarrassed that I even used it, but I think it fit.
Yeah, no. One of the things that I also thought about, also in terms of resumes, is write out your resume in 10 years or whatever. And
Oh,
it's,
yeah.
it's a common interview question. Well, where do you hope to be in 10 years? And you just pull out the printed resume. Here you go. This
Is where.
Well, one of the
and
things,
yeah.
sorry.
No,
So
please
one of
go.
the things we're interested in is this concept of vivid visions. So, like, most people will be familiar with the idea of a vision. Like, your vision could, for many organizations, it's a one-line comment. For many organizations, in my opinion, it's not even a vision. It's not even a description of a future state. But this idea of a vivid vision, where you go through, it's something I've experimented with personally just in the last couple of years, where you go through and you actually write out, like, so you might have a headline vision statement, but then you spend pages, and it might be in the form, I've never thought about that, but I like that, like in the form of a resume, where you actually start to articulate in more detail, this is what my life looks like, this is what my career looks like. And I mean, time will tell, but I have this tendency to think that that stuff works. Well, I know it works in organizations with setting goals and visions, because I think what happens if, even if you're not consciously thinking about it, on a subconscious level, every time you face a decision, you can ask yourself, I can go left or right. Is this a step in the direction of the life I want to create for myself? Is this a step in the direction of the organization we want to create? Or is this a step in any other direction? And if the answer is a step in any other direction, go, well, we've got to find a better answer. And so, yeah, I'd never thought about a CV of the future, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, you remind me of a quote. I don't remember who said it. I think it was a politician said that when it comes to like working on deals and having to compromise with other people, what they do is, so long as it's a step in the right direction, even if it's not as big of a step as they would want, that's a good compromise. But stepping forward and then having to go step back in some other thing where like it's a give and a take is a bad compromise. Where it's fine to go halfway, but going forward and back is sort of a negative compromise with that. And
well, you know what I'm reminded of? A great saying, which is momentum, not perfection. No, but I'm just reminded.
Yeah, no.
Like, I see that everywhere all the time.
Yeah, I think it works. It works.
And actually, so with that momentum versus perfection, but you also talk about this, vivid vision thing, this big goal, right? And so when it comes to setting goals, do you think doing like small goals that you can accomplish and hit every day and get those successes, get that sort of confidence and build up that momentum is the best strategy? Or do you think having this big, massive goal where even if you only hit 60%, that's a massive, massive success, right? Which do you think is a better sort of thought process for goal setting?
So I think both. So I think first and foremost, like, set a long-term goal. Like, maybe that's a cop out, but first and foremost, set a long-term goal. And when I say set it, like, again, momentum, not perfection. Just think about it. Like, just think it, like, daydream for a while about what would I like my life to look like? What would I like my career to look like? I think it's even better. The more you can do to just write it down or something like that, the better. But just think of it, like, even just thinking about it and like starting to clarify, as you're washing the dishes or you're going for a walk or going for a run or whatever, or commuting, like, just think about it a little and let it some clarity emerge. Like, that's momentum, not perfection. That's good enough. And then, so I think, the research supports this, like, having ambitious long-term goals in that are inspiring drives motivation, and if you're aligning stuff, which I'll come to in a moment, drives movement in that direction. And look, if you set a goal and it's 100%, you get 60%, well, you still got 60%. It's better than zero, right? So, like, that's the first point I make. Then the second point of the daily goals or the short-term goals, where they're daily, I think they're great. And I have daily habits and activities that I choose, some that I do always around just trying to and this is something I've been doing for the last couple of years. I've been experimenting with it for like 10 years, but I've sort of been doing it more deliberately and I think better for the last couple of years around things that you just always need to keep in check in your life, like health. Like this is not the most important thing, but finances. Like we need to, and that's not about having heaps of money for me. That's just about having a sustainable life. And sustainable life means being healthy and physical and psychological well-being. Around just keeping up some of my daily habits. I have some daily habits around writing that I do, but also around checking in on my daily habits. Then I pick things that I want to do every quarter, right, that are aligned with my long-term goals that I'm going to focus on. And again, going back to the early conversation, it's picking a few things, the vital few things that are going to shift the dial in the direction of my long-term goals this quarter, and then trying to do them, most of them, every day. Because I think the advantage of everyday ones is you start to feel a sense of momentum, like from doing it. You get that little dopamine hit of, for me, it's a spreadsheet of just putting a tick in that spreadsheet box of going, I did it. And again, something is better than nothing, right? Now you're starting to understand why all my former colleagues think it's hilarious that I say momentum, not perfection, because I'm going to say it again. Like, you build that sense of momentum, and I think that drives a sense of well-being, that drives a sense of productivity, and that supports us to keep going. And so I think the answer is both. I think ultimately in long term, you want to focus on outcomes that you want. So the outcome might be, if you're a doctor, I'm just making it up, a doctor or a nurse, I want to save this many lives, or I want to extend the lives of this many people. But in the shorter term, I think there's advantages in having activity-based goals or habits, activities that you want to do every day, because you can control that. Like, you can just do it every day. Like for me, I write a little bit every day, sometimes more, but make sure I write a little bit every day because I can control that. There's I think it's in Atomic Habits by James Clear. I think in that book he uses the example where they did a study with 3 groups. They split the group into 3 people, and it was about weight loss. And one group of people was the control group. They said, just keep doing what you're doing. One group of people, they said, we want you to run 20 or 30 minutes, I don't remember what it was, but a decent chunk of time on a treadmill. They gave them all treadmills. We want you to run 20 minutes or 30 minutes every day. The third group of people, they gave them all treadmills, and they said, all we want you to do is to stand on the treadmill for 2 minutes every day, right? And it's that third group that lost the most weight, right? Because whenever we're confronted, and this is true of organisations and individuals, when you wake up in your morning, you go, I don't have time, I don't have the energy to do 30 minutes on the treadmill. Like, that leads many of us just not to do it on many days. But if the thing is, well, can I stand on the treadmill for 2 minutes? Of course I can stand on the treadmill for 2 minutes. So people did that more days than people ran the 20 or 30 minutes. And then once you're on the treadmill, once you're there, once you show up to the gym, or once you show up to that meeting in a work context, once you start having the hard conversation, you go, well, now I'm here. Like, I'm showing up now. Now, if I'm standing on the treadmill for 2 minutes, I might as well start running. And so those people ran more frequently, and I believe they ran for longer on average than the second group, and hence they lost more weight. And so back to about the small daily things, I think to think about things like that, we're talking an individual level now as an example, but it's true of organizations and teams too.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. We love our spreadsheets. I have my massive one. And then also to your point about the stand on the treadmill, I do a similar thing where it's doing one push-up gets me that one check mark, but doing a quota of push-ups get me that too. So definitely agree. Gavin, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds exactly like something that would come out of Atomic Habits. Although I don't remember exactly reading that part of the book, but okay. I mean, pretty much
I might be getting confused, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no, it sounds exactly like something that would be in the book. I guess I'm just forgetting. But because pretty much the idea is to just show up to the gym and you'll do a lot more. Instead of setting the goal of maybe showing up to the gym, literally all you could do, like what he says in the book, is just lay your clothes out the night before you go to bed. Like, that's literally all you have to do, and it kind of sets that chain reaction, that momentum, like you talk about, to get you to the gym, to get you to lose more weight, to get you more fit at the end of the day. It's that small decision. I mean, it could literally be
true of organizations too. So it's evidently, in research shows it's true at an individual level in the sort of areas we're talking about, but it's true of organizations too. Like in that you would have heard of Good to Great. Like in that book, one of the things
Yeah.
it talks about, it's the 20-mile march or the 40-mile march or something. But the idea is that one of the things that organisations do that are most impactful and most successful over the long term is they just keep going. They do a little bit every day, every week, every quarter. And so all these things that, you know, many of us are learning through books like Atomic Habits, through listening to podcasts about what we can change in our personal lives, you know, what we're discovering and what we've discovered and what we've found is it's true of organisations too. Because remember, I mean, to state the obvious, organisations are social structures. Organisations don't exist without people. It's a collective of people. So, of course, it's not as simple as saying exactly what works for the individual works for everyone. But remember, organisations are made up of a series of relationships between people. Now, of course, some organisations have fewer people and more capital or more machinery and more whatever. But all organisations have at least one person, and most organisations have multiple people. So if you find ways that can help the individual align themselves productively with the organisation, the team or organisational goals over the long term, and if you do it in the right way, that'll be a great outcome for the individual. It'll be a great outcome for the team or organisation.
Yeah. So what we were talking about earlier kind of reminded me of something that Elon Musk does and how he sets very unrealistic deadlines for the team. And so they'll get this crazy project and he'll be like, okay, let's accomplish this thing in like 6 weeks when it should take double the time or something. But he'll set that 6-week deadline. And do they accomplish the deadline, the goal most of the time? No. But they accomplish way more in that 6-week stretch than they would have otherwise if that goal hadn't have been set or that deadline hadn't have been set in the first place. Do you agree with that frame of thought? Or
So I've thought about Elon Musk management style quite a bit, and Steve Jobs as well, because I think they're famously hard driving and famously aggressive and abrasive with people. And so it sort of challenges, actually, like if you look at them as examples, it challenges what we sort of promote and believe in at Impact Society, going, well, we don't support being aggressive and abrasive with people. So two thoughts occur to me. Like one is, well, I wonder how much more effective Steve Jobs or Elon Musk would have been if they'd taken their brilliance and their visionary approach and then combined it with a more humanistic approach. Would they have got further? I don't. Maybe not. I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't know. But the other thing I'd say with like people, like leaders like that, and those two in particular, is I suspect they're reflective of the exceptions. I think it's also the case that I don't know this for a fact, but I imagine Tesla, SpaceX, Apple have essentially an unlimited labour market for themselves in a way that other businesses don't, because everybody wants to work there, right? So they can burn through people. They can afford to have turnover in their business, and they do, because they can always replace. There will always be enough brilliant people, particularly in the US, that they can keep. Normal organisations can't do that. They can't afford to lose people.
And I think what that ends up doing though too is they're cycling through so many different people that like they know they're looking for a specific kind of individual. And so I bet you their turnover rate's pretty high because the market's so many people want to work there. And so they're just burning through a bunch of people, and the ones that stick. And so they're able to set deadlines like that because they have so many different people cycling through the system. And so they're tailoring it to this specific subset of the population, and they're able to find that because they're able to. I mean, so many people want to work there, like what you were saying. So that's probably why, right?
Yeah, and I think like I just I love reading, but I particularly love reading like business biographies or histories of businesses and stuff like that. Just, you know, for the reasons we were talking about earlier, like I feel like I find them interesting, but like I just got so much to learn. And having read the Walter Isaacson biographies of both Steve Jobs and Elon Musk.
Yeah, I just read the Musk one recently.
Right. So I'm pretty sure, I read it a few months ago, but I'm pretty sure in there, like it makes clear that a lot of people get burnt out and leave quickly.
Yeah.
I think it's also the case. I'm not super confident that the people who stick around can stick around forever, because even like I just finished reading today or listening to the book on Bridgewater and Ray Dalio. which I'm really interested in around their radical transparency and things like that.
Yeah.
And like even there, like they have high turnover. It's another example. They have super high turnover, and they actually say that that's okay because they say, oh, Bridgewater's not for everyone. So the people who stay are the people who stay. But then, like a theme in that story, like at least as that book presents it, is that even the people who stay aren't that happy, and that they're not in great. Some of them aren't in great shape towards the end.
Yeah.
But I think it's true that organisations like that, they have essentially an unlimited labour market because they're never going to be short of candidates. No, like normal organisations don't have that luxury. So whether or not you think it's wrong or right to treat people like that, I personally think it's wrong. I also think it's dumb for most organisations to do that. So because they're just not like it'll be too expensive, like just the transactional cost of replacing people all the time and bringing them up to speed. But also they're going to run out of their labour. They're going to quickly exhaust their labour pool, however big their labour pool is. Through reputation, people won't want to work there, but also they might just run out of people. You actually asked a question about goals, and I gave you an answer to a question you didn't ask, like about pushing people. But on the question of goals, about driving really hard, and then like saying you very rarely achieve it, but you achieve more than you would have otherwise.
Yeah.
From the research that I've read is there are advantages. So what you're talking about, of course, or what we're talking about is these stretch goals, and there's obvious advantages to the stretch goals. Is that you aim higher, further than you would have otherwise. But the disadvantage is you have this perpetual sense of disappointment at not achieving the goals. You don't get to sort of enjoy that quite the same dopamine hit, quite the same sense of momentum that comes with I set it, I nail it, right? And there's something that feels great about that, and there's something that helps us go further and faster. On the other alternative is you set very realistic goals, and then you constantly, the 2 minutes on the treadmill, you constantly get that positive feedback loop of completing it, but you're not pushing as far as you could otherwise. So one piece of research I read is that the best way to do it is to set, I can't remember how to describe it, like range goals. So you set goals in a range. And certainly Google does or did this with OKRs, where you set a range where you set the bottom limit of the range as the realistic, achievable goal, and the upper level is the stretch goal. So if you land somewhere in between them, you still get the sense of achievement, but it also pushes you to go further.
Mm-hmm.
So for Tim Ferriss's Full Hour Body, his like fitness massive Bible of content, I believe it mentioned a story of a guy who set those sort of range goals for his weight loss over time. Right. And what he would do is if he ever went to I'm losing too much weight too fast, he would quickly eat and have all this junk food and get back within the range. But if he ever was going over, then I work out, then I eat better. And so I thought it was super interesting that you sort of build in this reward system of if you do too well, you eat and get back up to within the range. Like, because that means you're guaranteed to reach the goal when you expect to reach it. You can't reach it any faster, right? But you're guaranteed to get there. And if you're happy so long as you get there.
Yeah. I tend to think that those range goals, well, this one bit of research at least suggests they're the way to go. And I think if you read about objectives and key results, OKRs, and the way they've been used in Intel and Google and other companies, they use them like that they set a target, which is a stretch that, maybe not as extreme as Elon Musk, but like they set a target, which is undoubtedly a stretch and pretty unrealistic most of the time. And they normally say, if we get within 70% of that target, that's a green, like it's a green light. If we get, I can't remember exactly, but I think it's 40 to 70%, that's an orange light. Less than 40, it's a red. So if you get 75%, then you feel good about yourself because you go, well, I didn't get to the 100%, but I got within range. And if you get to 100%, or if you get over 100%, and if you do that repeatedly, it actually tends to suggest you're not setting your stretch goals high enough. It's interesting. Yeah. That's what we'd advocate for is setting range goals.
Well, sort of to wrap up here, what are some range goals for Impact Society? Where is it headed? What can we hope to see?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just taking a drink of water at the wrong
No,
time.
you're good.
Well, I think we've thought about this and we've spent time talking about it. Where we want to be, like, say we're doing this podcast again in 5 or 6 years' time.
Sounds
I
good.
think by 2030 we want to have a global presence in terms of the difference that we're making. I mean, I feel we're already doing that in our own very modest way. Like our community, our small but growing community, is actually really nicely spread around the world, which is really cool. And we've got people from we publish a bunch of free tools as well, like not just thinking. I don't know if either of you've seen them, but we already provide a bunch of tools to people that they can use straight away. We've had people from Netflix, from Amazon, from Google. I'm just from the NHS in the UK, from like ABC Broadcasting in Australia, and some very cool. It's quite humbling actually to see organisations that are downloading our tools, and that's really cool. So we want to be doing that. We want to have physical stores, like our retail presence or our physical presence around the world, and certainly I'd like to see us, in at the very least in the English-speaking world, but not exclusively, because we don't want to be. I mean, there's an obvious reason why we're focusing on English in the first place, because we both speak English. But I'd like to see us spreading out into other languages as well. Like, I don't want to limit our impact just to people who happen to or are privileged enough to have learned English. I'd like to see us certainly in Europe, in North America, in Australia, in Asia, with a physical presence. And at each of those locations, I think I'd love to see us have a shop front where we actually make available a selection of not just our products, but also books and tools and things like that we find just in our community that are really good. And then we try and bring them together to curate a collection of stuff that's going to help managers be more effective leaders, but also to have space there where we can host. I don't know what it looks like exactly, but there's certainly be lectures, or I love the idea of having like discussion series where, stuff like this, but it happens in a room and people can have a drink of wine or a beer and like something like that and just sit around with like-minded people in their city and chat about it. We'll be having conferences regularly, where we bring people together about learning, about debate, about thinking. And then we will have built out our online system, our integrated management system, which includes the online tools complemented by physical tools. And we spoke before about the 6 or 8 realms, and that we will have built out actually not just a minimally viable product portfolio in each, but actually a really good, very close to being complete for the time, but constantly evolving. So we've arrived at a point of completeness for the time, and then it keeps evolving. And then in terms of the number of people we're impacting, I'd like to see us impacting millions of people by then in terms of help. And then when you think about that, right, like you think about on average, it would vary by country and it certainly vary by organisation, but each manager would directly manage perhaps like half a dozen to a dozen people. And like, we're trying to help managers, because if we want people around the world at their best, like passionate in their work, making a big impact, happy, what we need to do first, we think, is actually help managers find their own passion and effectiveness and impact. And then they're the ones that are going to go out and make a difference to their 6 to 12 people. And so like, if we can be helping millions of managers, then they're going to be helping, tens of millions of people to have a better experience of work. Because the reality is, the way the world works for most of us is we have to work. And for most of us, most people work 5 days a week. So work may not be the most important thing for people, and that's fine. But the reality is that life revolves around work, because usually we go on leave when it fits with work. We don't work when we don't want to be on leave. We go on leave when we can get away from work. We have weekends when we're not working. We do things in the evenings when we're not at work. So the truth is that life revolves around work to a large extent. And so as long as that's the model of society, then we may as well make work an enjoyable, engaging, nourishing experience for people. One, because think of the impacts that'll have on society, but two, because we need organisations to like be making a positive difference in society. So, that's what I'd love to see.
I love it. That sounds phenomenal. We're going to be sure to link to everything you're doing with the Impact Society and everything else in the description so people can check it out. Do you guys have a launch date on that product that you said was coming out soon, the strategic planning guide?
No, but
Not yet.
I'll give you one, and then that, to the point of aggressive goals that hold ourselves accountable, then that'll do by the end of next month, February.
By the end of February.
Yeah, you can hold me to that, and then this week Joel will be happy to hear me say that because he'll be like, "Good."
Well, February ends in 3 days, so by the end of March. Okay,
sorry.
I'm like, whoa, that's very aggressive.
Yeah.
All right,
That's
guys.
very aggressive. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
Joel would have been extra happy with me saying February, but I'm traveling back to Australia in a couple of days, so the reality is that would be very aggressive. End of March. Thank you.
End
for
of March.
helping me there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll be looking for that end of March. And
Please look for it.
it's time to jump into rapid fire. So
Okay.
6 questions. We say answer in less than 30 seconds, but they're a little deep. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
First one though is easy. How much sleep do you get?
So I mentioned earlier that this may not be true for everyone, but it's true for me. As I get older, I prioritise sleep now, and I just look back and go, I was such an idiot when I was young. I spent the first 20 years of my adult life tired, and I thought there was something wrong with me. All that was wrong with me is I didn't know the basics of sleep. So I try and, including when I'm travelling, which is a bit harder sometimes with time zone changes. I go to bed at 11, go to sleep at 11, and I get up at 7, so 8 hours.
Awesome.
Look, I don't do that every night, but that, like most nights I do. So I try to get more and regular sleep. And it's been, I'm embarrassed to say it because a lot of people work this out when they're 20. Like, it took me till I was 41 to work this out. But it's life-changing.
Okay, what's your favorite book and why?
That's a really good question. I don't there's a few books that come to mind. I know that's not the question you asked me. So there's one that I read, which I can't remember. I think it's called American Icon, and it's about the Ford Motor Company when Alan Mulally took over it. He was an executive at Boeing, so a complete industry outsider, and he took over Ford. And this was around the great financial crisis, so in the late 2000s or just before. And the motor industry is obviously a very traditional industry, like particularly in the US, like the manufacturing industry. And he came in and he talks about love in the workplace. He talks about kindness. But his expression and we didn't really get into this, but this is something that's really big for me. His expression of kindness includes holding people rigidly accountable to behaviours and what they say they do. So that was a really important book for me for 2 reasons. One, it filled out a lot of my thinking, like it really built out a lot of my thinking. But 2, it actually validated some of my thinking because, like you work in like the workplace I've worked in, people don't talk about love and kindness, that sort of thing. And they're dominated by really good, well-intentioned, hardworking, but typically men and older men. And it's not because they're not kind, loving people, but because they haven't been conditioned in the workplace to think that that's okay for all the reasons we spoke about earlier. So that's one. And then the other one that came to mind was, I think it's called The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, he is again the CEO of Disney. And he has a very similar sort of philosophy around management and leadership. And he's at retirement age, and I say that not because of the fixed age, but because he did actually retire, but now he's come back out of retirement to be CEO again. So again, it's a way of role modeling for people. One, showing the way that actually treating people kindly and well and with respect. One, it doesn't mean letting people get away with anything and being super friendly and everything all the time. It's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do from a management leadership perspective. So I learned a lot, but also I found it validating because in a sense, I worked in these workplaces and I'm so grateful for all the support I've ever had. But sometimes I did feel like a bit of like I think people just in a really generous and kind way sort of smiled and nodded at me, and people said it out loud to me in a loving way. They go, "Oh yeah, okay, here we go, Sean." Like with one ear, like someone said to me once, if I can just share this anecdote, they joined my group. In fact, I took over their group, and they said to me, they go, "Oh, it's all like rainbows and fairy dust with you, like sort of thing. Like it's just come on, that sort of thing." And this guy retired like 2 or 3 years later. And this is like a 70-year-old guy, and he's lovely, and I love him, and that sort of thing. He'd found he'd printed out a picture of a unicorn with a rainbow and stuff, and he coloured it in by hand, and he gave it to me, and he said, "You know what? You're right." He said, I remember saying that to you. I'd never let him forget it, but I remember saying that to you, and I thought you were lost up your own ass, so to speak. And um, he said it's great. He said I'm really grateful actually for the time that we had working together. And he said to me, I said I don't want you to ever change that or lose that. And so like as someone like that was my context, and reading like these really successful people like who are generations or a generation or two older than me, going, oh, it's okay, like I'm not crazy, like sort of thing.
That's phenomenal.
Maybe I am crazy, but not for that reason, that sort of thing. But
Yeah. If you could give, I think I know the answer to this, but if you could give one quick piece of advice to young people, what would it be?
oh, this might not be what you thought I was saying. I'd say it's to be a kind and decent human being above all else, and that is in society, that's in your family, that's in your friendship groups, but at work as well. And that when you go into the workplace, you don't need to be someone else. You don't need to sort of conform with any sort of image of a person, like whatever, like being if we're talking about corporations, whatever you picture a corporate person looking like, you don't need to do that. Just be a kind and decent person, and if nothing, like you can never be proud of that. Like I don't have kids, but like I had a conversation with my best mate recently, or not so long ago, and we're talking about being kind versus smart. And I was saying, well, parents focus so much, and my parents did, on trying to help me be smart, so to speak. And it's not that my parents didn't do this, but I'm like, I'd much rather have kind kids than smart kids. Like ideally, you'd like your kids to be kind and smart, of course, but I'd much rather, like, I think it's more important in life, in the world, in the workplace, to be known to be kind than it is to be smart. Now, be both, but like if you can only choose one, do that.
I love
Okay.
that. I was expecting momentum, not perfection, but that is an
That's what I
amazing
was too.
message.
Well, that'll be my second piece of advice.
Excellent.
Okay. What's most important to you in life?
Well, I'd be repeating the last one. It's to be a kind person, and that's something that I don't think I was ever a fundamentally unkind person. But I look back at myself when I was a teenager and my sort of adolescent years through to my mid-20s, and I didn't consistently express that. And certainly, and I'm embarrassed about some of the things that I said out of ignorance and naivety and insecurity, is the truth. And also when I entered the workplace, when I was effective at what I did, and I pushed people hard, and I shudder like when I recall some of the things I said. And it's not because, I think it's fair to say, it's not because I was actually a fundamentally unkind person. It's because I didn't have the confidence to express it, and it was insecurities that got in the way of it, and like a fear of control. So I want to be. I think for me, it's most important to be a kind person. I try to do that in every interaction every day. I often fail. Like I do things that, like I look back on it and I think, oh, I could have done that better. Or I wish I'd, and most of the time what I'm better at now is actually addressing that and going back to the person and say, hey, when we had that conversation the other day, I'm sorry, that didn't come across the way. And I think that's really important as a leader, is to be prepared to have that humility and show that vulnerability. Again, like this is my second favorite saying, it's the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. The other thing is to, like, it's important to me to be impactful in life, and certainly we hope that Impact Society becomes the vehicle for us as individuals, but collectively with a growing organisation, to be highly impactful in the world. And to lead. We don't have. I don't have an grand goals around levels of wealth and things like that. But I would like to finish up life feeling like I've made a meaningful difference in the world. That I left it a little better than I found it in my own small contribution. And uh, and then the other thing is too that like what's more important to me than all of that is actually having really good, healthy, meaningful relationships with my friends, and in the future I look forward to having a partner and a family with which I can really create something beautiful with them that complements the impact I make in the world through things like impact society. So our choice of the word impact and impact society, it's very deliberate. I think impact's just a word I love because I think you make an impact with your family. And can I just take the chance to clarify one thing? Our view isn't that people have to pick all these grandiose, spectacular goals. Just that we'd like to help people pick goals that are spectacularly well aligned with what they want to do. So if they want to be a stay-at-home parent, and like that's the way they want to make their impact in the world, that's awesome. Like as long as it's true to them and what they want, like that's what we want to help people do. And as grand as they get, we want to help people with that too.
That's amazing. Uh, Fifth one feels like a rehash, but if you could change anything about the world, what would it be?
It would be to normalise a leadership philosophy in all organisations. And when I say organisations, I mean in government, like the political and bureaucratic arms of government, in not-for-profits, in businesses, in community groups, to normalise a leadership philosophy that the way to sustain great results for any team or organisation as a whole involves treating your people well, engaging them in their work, and that over the long term that will help those people actually be more productive in whatever direction that organisation chooses, and it will actually have really positive benefits for the individual. And then for the reasons we spoke about before, when I get excited about like all the people going home on a Friday, like I'd like to change that actually our work is seen as a thing that enhances and complements the world and our lives as a whole, not as something that competes with it. Now, in the short term, there are always going to be trade-offs, but over the long term, that these are things that complement each other. That in the long term, we'll be better parents, friends, partners, community members when we're better team members in our organisations. And I'd like to make it, and the flip side of that is make it intolerable in society. And this is an issue with politics in many parts of the world, including where we each live, that it's to be unkind to other people and disrespectful is becoming okay in many respects. And I hate that, but also I think it leads to troublesome outcomes in the long term.
Okay. Now, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, probably if I'm remembered by people, if I'm remembered at all, like I feel like that's a pretty good like improvement, right? That's a start. But I guess it would be remembered as someone, because I think this is a lifelong journey and something I'm particularly interested in the last couple of years, is someone who is their true, authentic selves all the time, which is something I'm forever working on. And being my true, authentic self is that people watched what I did and how I did it, and that aligned with the things I described before about what's most important in life, about being kind, about being impactful. And so if I was remembered for being consistently authentic and being kind and impactful, I'll think, oh, that's pretty good, because I suspect trying to do all those things is actually a lifelong journey that we're forever working on that. And there's still lots of things that I sort of frustrate myself with, and where I feel like I let myself down, like to my own, perhaps too high standards. But one thing I'm trying to do more often is to reflect instead on the progress I've made, versus the 20-year-old sort of idiot me that I was talking about before that was at university saying silly things. I go, well, I have made a bunch of progress, and that's good. I might be disappointed with like the things I'm not yet nailing and the times where I sort of don't quite live up to those standards. But yeah. So I'd love to be remembered at all, and specifically to be remembered as someone who, lived an authentic life that was true to themselves, who was kind and was impactful in the world. And that includes, the other thing I said about eventually being remembered for being a great partner and a great parent.
I love all of that. So much of what you've shared, the kindness and humility and sort of leadership and building up all these different traits in the world is the goal, just by impacting the people who have impact on other people. I think that's a phenomenal goal. I'm very excited to see what happens with Impact Society. We caught you on the early stages, and so I'm very curious to see where it ends up. And thank you for coming on. You've been enormously generous with your time and all your thoughts. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to me. You've been enormously generous in listening to me, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. Actually, and I'm sort of like, there's part of me that doesn't want it to end because I'm actually really enjoying it. But I appreciate you got things to do. I got things to do, and I look forward to you holding me accountable and asking me some sharp questions about why a product hasn't launched by the end of March, if it hasn't.
I promise you, this is just the first time you're on our podcast.
Okay, thanks.
This discussion was amazing, and I can't wait for next time. So everyone, please subscribe so you can see the next conversation, and we'll see you Tuesday at noon. Don't be late. We'll see you then.